Hi, everybody. I'm back to talk to you about your responses to discussion three, which again were very good. A lot of good information about communicating and how you work with others, especially others on the team, and families, parents as well. A lot of good ideas there. One thing that a few people said, was like, you need to open the dialogue. You need to open the dialogue. I mean, something similar to that. As simple as that sounds, a lot of people don't open the dialogue. What I mean by that is they might say, hey, they might be nice, they might be whatever, and they think they've opened the dialogue, but they haven't opened the dialogue. You really have to do that with intention and purpose. I would encourage you to do that. I would encourage you to think about when you're talking with families or other coworkers, etc. You talk about how you could communicate about things, what kind of feedback you would like to receive, what kinds of ideas that you're looking for, or what kind of suggestions you would like maybe for working together more collaboratively, for example. It has been my experience that when I purposefully invite people in to a communication alliance or to a collaborative relationship, that people not only appreciate it, but they feel better about doing it. Okay, what I mean is, like, what if a parent has something they want to talk about and they think, oh, what if she thinks it's a criticism? Or what if a colleague, let's say a general education teacher, has a question about something with a student and they're like, oh, what if she thinks I'm not doing my job if I have to ask her this? A lot of times people make assumptions about things that we aren't even aware of. We don't even notice it. So when you ask them specifically, I do want to communicate. I want to collaborate. I'd like us to have this way to do it. And you all gave a lot of different ways that you're doing it in your schools right now, whether it's through, meetings or emails or phone calls or whatever. There were lots of different ways that you were taking that on. And I think it sounds like anyway, it's working really well for all of you. One other thing that I noticed a couple things about were issues around leadership, clear leadership. And I want to um, encourage you, I guess, as your leaders in the field and training to be even more so in this career that you have and in the program you're in, that clear leadership is really very important. And if there's one thing I wish we could do in our work that we don't do very well, is that we allow other people to lead, and that leaders are open to other people participating, and none of it is personal. Okay? I mean, none of it. So I'll give you an example. Just I'm making this up as I'm talking to you, but so I go to a meeting and I say, well, Linda, I was wondering. I mean, I think you're doing a really good job with what you're doing with the art lessons and everything else. And I mean, your little flower things you made for the mothers was really great. And it's like, what is it you're talking about, right? We start with all this personal stuff. Like, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I don't want this to be that way. What? Love it if we could find a way to make the environments that we're in open to feedback, people giving opinions, people, dissecting things and trying to work it through and figure it out without any fear of retaliation, like maybe from an administrator or from being sort of, iced out by your colleagues. I've been in a lot of schools where things are very personal, and so it's almost hard to bring them up because, it's like, who do you think you are to say, right? Those kinds of things. So when I was reading about clear leadership and I was looking at you guys, meaning looking at where you are in your careers and what you're doing in this program, I'm like, maybe you can go out there and you can set up ways that we could begin to work together in schools that are comfortable, that we're comfortable in dissension, we're comfortable in disagreeing, we're comfortable in stating, our viewpoints, knowing that we're all working together for the same thing. And the thing that we're working on together is on behalf of the kid. So if we would be able to do that, oh gosh, wouldn't that be great? Because it would be such a good opening for new teachers to come in, for example, and to really be mentored by seasoned teachers by hearing this kind of dialogue. You hear some of this. My background is in social work as well, and in social work, you go to clinical supervision groups, and that's what they are. People, you present your case, and people literally start telling you, you know, you could do this, you could do that. What about this? What about that? Did you think of this? Did you think of that? Okay, first, you know, I shouldn't say first time, first a lot of times. It took a while. It made me really anxious. And I could feel myself getting defensive. Like somebody would say, like, well, why didn't you? And I wanted to just bark back, like, well, you weren't sitting there, right? It took a while for me to feel comfortable that the feedback I was receiving was professional. It was like doctors talking about an x-ray. You know, this is what I see, this is what I see, and that's all it was. It was such a good growth experience for me. Now, when people give me feedback now, I'm fine with it. Like, I'm really fine with it. Even when I don't like it, I'm fine with it. What I mean by fine with it, I mean, yeah, it's crummy to get feedback. People think you're a loser, but I mean, it's I don't get so anxious. I don't get all wrapped up in it. I understand that I'm in the middle of something, this journey of something, you know, trying to teach a kid or work as a therapist in a way or whatever, and that it's important to have other people's viewpoints. It's also really helpful to have that kind of interaction. I have a friend that I've talked to for years about cases, and we're really good friends, but even every now and then, even she will kind of make me a little bit like, you know, like it's just like, well, you didn't really do that right because blah 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 blah, blah, right? And I'm like, I did too. I can get really kind of defensive about it, but it's like you practice it long enough, you do it long enough that after a while you realize it's just the work. That's just so I mentioned that with my friend now. In fact, I just talked to her and I was talking about some case stuff. It doesn't bother me at all anymore. And I mean, she's not mean about it, but you know, I used to be so sensitive about that kind of feedback. And I find a lot of people in schools are. So anyway, blah blah blah. I started with clear leadership. It'd be so great if you guys could get out there and do something similar, you know, where like a clinical supervision meeting where when you met with your staff or whatever, that you set ground rules like that, that you model that. You if somebody brings something up to you as a leader and it's a disagreement or I don't know, it hits you a little funny or whatever, model what it's like to be able to hear that information in a clinical and or professional setting, and be able to work with that information, because I think that's oftentimes where our teams really fall apart. Um, Honestly, the other thing that came up that I wanted to talk about was just a little bit about how to present information, and I just can't encourage enough for you to be working on family friendly language. Okay, so let me tell you two things about that. How I mean that. I'm going to divide it kind of in two ways. Okay. Um, well, okay. First of all, it's not both about family friendly, but let me just say it. I think you'll get it. So, first of all, um, somebody used the words getting it. I wish I'd written down the whole sentence. Getting at something deeply and quickly. I don't know, but I liked it because what it did. Or what it said to me was that we get right to the point, and we basically get to what is the material or information or whatever that we want. We get to that, and we do that quickly. So, like, I think maybe it was in reference to working with parents that you get involved deeply and quickly, and I loved that phraseology, because I think it's true of the people that we work with as our colleagues as well as families. We oftentimes we spend a lot of time doing, talking around things and making ourselves probably spin in circles, when we really could get places, much more quickly and much more deeply. And the way I suggest doing that is using family friendly language. What I mean by that is we don't throw in all the terms, AD, BD, or what, I'm sorry, can't even think what I was going to say a minute ago. ED, that's not what it was. I'm like, that didn't make sense. ED, BD, LD, ADHD, we throw everything around. We have all the terminology. We do all these things, okay? And even with professionals, we sometimes lose them with the language that we use. And even with professionals, a lot of times the best guide or the best information to receive is simple. It's clear. It's direct. So we're not trying to fancy it up with anything else, like some of the labels that we tend to use in our business. So when I talk about family friendly, um, the piece of that that's a little different from what I just said is that also I would encourage you to use language with the families that sounds like you'd be talking to any other family. Okay? So instead of, well, because of the problems with his blah blah blah, you wouldn't talk to most families that way. You would talk to them a different way. Okay? And we would give them examples maybe or ideas about things that are more typical of the world than they are of the special ed language. Okay? So I'm going to give you an example, and maybe this will make it a little more understandable. Um, I met a mom one time, and she came in and she had a little boy who was clearly on the spectrum. He was really, 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 really super hyper. And he was all over the room and whatever. So he was doing a lot of different stuff. Okay, so he was pulling out all these toys, and I said like, oh, he's really interested in a lot of things. And then he was like lining all this stuff up, and I said, oh, he's so neat and organized. And then he wanted something, and he just kept going after it. And I said, oh, he really well, if he wants something, he perseveres. I think I said, and maybe I say stubborn. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, the mom says to me, I don't know, a few minutes in, have you ever worked with kids with autism before? And I said, oh yes, from life. And she goes, well, he's perseverating, or this is the lining up. He's talking about those things as well. She was like, all those things that are you're watching, and then she gave me all these terms about what those things meant. And like I think when he was sort of stimming, I said something like, "Oh, he gets all excited," maybe something like that. I was trying to basically watch and narrate what the mom was watching with me, but I was trying to do it from a mom's perspective, right? Not a special ed perspective. So anyway, after she asked me had I worked with kids before, I said yes, and she was like, "Well, this is this and this is that." Blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Well, I just didn't. He's your little boy, and I just wanted to talk about him like he was your little boy." Well, she started crying. I mean, crying quite a bit. And I, kind of waited for a minute, and I said, "Are you okay?" And she said, "Yes." And what she told me next was so sad to me. She said, "I only use those big words because otherwise the doctors don't take me seriously." So her idea was, because I wasn't sitting with her and going, yes, I do see he has some perseverative behaviors, and did that with her, she assumed, A, I didn't know what I was doing, and I assumed that I was going to be helping her out by being like that, right? So, B, we didn't get one another at all. The point is that it was a really sad moment, because what she said to me was, I really wish that people could talk like you do, because he is just kind of stubborn sometimes. But she had started putting all these labels with it. So when I talk about family friendly, that's an example of what I mean. I mean, like, why do we have to use clinical language? Okay, why do we have to always be making things so clinical? So, when I'm with teachers, even at schools, I will do that. When I see a kid who's really having a hard time and they start with some kind of, well, he has self-regulatory, blah, 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 whatever, and I'll say, oh boy, he goes after what he wants. And I smile. And the reason I do that is because I don't want us to forget that's the kid, right? And I don't want everything that he does to be seen as like really clinical. So, It's been very helpful for me with families to use language that sounds more like the way anybody else would talk to you about your kid, than using all the clinical jargony stuff that we do, right? When I see that in my practice with families, they are really very open to it. They're very open to the idea that I just like their kid. They really, I think, work with me probably much more comfortably after that. I'm not sure, but it seems to be the case. So that's what I mean by picking up some kind of language like that, if you can, and even using it with other people who tend to like over clinicalize a student. I guess it'd be pathologized, but whatever. That you hear a lot of that. So I just find the language to be really helpful for everyone. I get one last thing I just saw that I didn't say anything about. So I'll just mention it right at the end. Was one circumstance in which one of you had included your student in a meeting with parents where there had been some things going on. And it sounds like you had a good outcome from that. I love that. I am really a big believer in including students in meetings. Of course, it has to be appropriate at their level, all that other stuff. But I think kids should feel some ownership in the things that are going on in their lives. And if at the level that they're able to do that, I think it's really very meaningful for them. And I also think it probably, most likely, gives them a better buy-in to their education, et cetera. So whoever did that, I thought that was a really great thing that you did, to have a student involved in something that obviously involved the students. I recall it was a behavioral thing, or like wasn't turning stuff in or something like that. But anyway, I was like, yay, whoever you are, that you included that student, because I think that really makes things work out so much better. I guess the only thing I'll say just before I close is just really pay attention to confidentiality. Just really pay attention to it. I had a couple of things happen this last year where I've been working in this high school where very well-meaning people just didn't understand confidentiality. And it's just an important thing to make sure that you go over and over and over, especially with your paraprofessional staff. I'm not putting them down, that's not what I'm saying, but oftentimes paraprofessional staff have not been through the kinds of training programs that you're in, don't understand confidentiality as you do, and that's really important, particularly when working with families, because that can really kind of upend everything if it's not handled appropriately. So anyway, it was a great read again, and I really appreciate all the work that you did, and I'll be back to talk to you about discussion group 4 soon. Thanks.